All right, welcome to the November 3rd, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. I'm just going to do a quick audio test, make sure everything is coming through okay. All right, so let me just do a quick test. All right, welcome to the November. Okay, so it sounds like that's coming through just fine. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host of the Hangout today. If you haven't attended a Hangout before, how it works is you could submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could enter them live in the chat field. I'm broadcasting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if everyone that's watching live wants to do a quick introduction, tell us where you're based out of, that'd be great. So we can see, it's always interesting to see where people are attending from throughout the world. So, and if you want to ask questions, you could ask them in the chat field. So we'll get started with that in just a couple minutes. If you're watching this live, we're going to let some people go ahead and skip ahead. So you may want, if you're watching this live, feel free to introduce yourself. If you're watching this on a replay, you may want to skip ahead to maybe like 8 to 10 minutes as we let people get logged in. So we'll be doing that. Like many of you during kind of pandemic time, my family is at home, so I may be interrupted. So I'll apologize for any interruptions. I may have to help out my son with something in the middle, but we'll try to minimize those interruptions as much as possible. Also, as you ask questions, your ability to ask questions can far exceed my ability to answer them in a real-time manner. So it may be a little while before I get to the question. We'll try to get through all the questions in chronological order as much as possible. At some point, my timeline may run out, and sometimes I may lose some questions in the middle, so I'll apologize if that happens. But we'll try to get through as many questions. So if you ask the same question repeatedly, that just only kind of slows up the process. So at this point, if we could try to avoid doing that, that would be appreciated. And also sometimes if you could ask your question like which version, and if you're running Mac or PC, sometimes that information is helpful as well. So, but let's go ahead and see who's on. Seeing a lot of familiar faces. Good to be back. Sorry, I was tied up with some work obligations last week. Wasn't able to do the Hangouts, but I think we're good for both days this week. All right, so I see Ace on from Texas. Good to see you, Ace. Let's see who else is on. All right, so we see Jay from New Haven, Connecticut. Good to see you on. We see John Costigan from Kenosha. All right, Ted Springman. Okay, so we see Bill Vincent from Bradenton, Florida. Been there many times. All right, so we have Carlos from Colombia. Welcome to the Hangout. All right, so we have John Wells from Los Angeles, Sherman Oaks, Ted. We have Italy. Okay. Let's see. All right, so we have Jan from Stockholm. Good to see you on. And also, if this is your first Hangout, let us know as well. All right, so we have Pablo from Galicia, España. All right, so we have Sweden. Good to see Soren. We have Captenergy Music. All right, so we have London. All right, so we have Matthias from Hamburg, Germany. I miss going to Hamburg. All right. So I see a question from Nick. Yes, I got your surround question. So if you're on a Hangout, I'll go ahead and cover that today. All right, so we have Germany. All right, so we have Sir Robert from Atlanta. We have Barcelona. I was just watching a travel show late last night and set in Barcelona. Always wanted to go there. I've been to Spain a number of times, but never made it to Barcelona. Okay, so we have Michael from High Point, North Carolina. All right. All right, so we have Mark from Spain. Valdemorillo. I probably said that completely wrong. All right. So we have someone else from Germany, Romania. All right, someone else from Atlanta. All right, so we have India. All right, so I think we have 4 continents. All right, so we have Holland. Good to see Agent K in a Hangout. He helps us out with some moderation when needed. All right, so we have Antigua. We have Sri Lanka. Tobias from Germany. All right, just in a couple minutes and we'll get logged in. All right, so we have Oberhausen, Germany. All right, so Germany again from Udo. We have Northern Ireland, India. All right, let a couple more people get logged in, then we can get started. Okay, so a couple more people logging in. All right, so we have some questions coming in. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'll scroll up to the top and we'll go ahead and get started just a little bit early. All right, so a question from Ace. Hi, Greg. Hope you and your family are safe and doing well. We are. Thank you for asking. How can I cut a range of several tracks at specific timelines without having to use scissors tool on each and every single track? Okay, so let's say if I have a number of audio tracks, like what we see going on here, I'll just expand this folder. So if I have a number of different tracks, and if I wanted to split a number of audio files, we could use the range selection tool. And if we have the combined tool on, we could just kind of select from the top. And as I select a particular range, I could just do that. And then I could just hit Shift X, and that will automatically split those events that we've selected. So if I try these maybe as a slightly darker color, so if I wanted to just grab the range, I'll just recolor some of these parts quickly just so we could see it a little easier. So as I would just use the range tool, select just a range, and then you could hit Shift X, and that will automatically cut those different events in the range. So at this point, I could just split those events without having to use the scissors tool. And if I wanted to cut another range within the range cut, we could do that as well. So now we could just hold down your Shift key and select different events just like that. So use the range tool and then hit Shift plus X. Okay, so question, hi, about chord track. When I drag a MIDI loop into the project with a chord track on it, what should I set to avoid a forgery and mess in the loop like I have now? So if you have, let's say, a quick chord track, so I'll just kind of zoom in here. We'll drop some chords in. Okay, so if we have this and now I drag a MIDI loop into it, so I will just kind of come to, let's say, my loops. And I think I'll have some MIDI loops here. Let's say not drums. Let's say I'll just audition. So if I drag this completely in, and let's say if I have this duplicated, it's not going to follow the chords. So let's say I'll just have this particular part soloed. So it's not going to automatically follow the chords unless you have it set to in the chord track. So now if I say follow chords and scales, at this point it will change. So that way that part will follow the chords just like that. So just make sure that you just choose that to off. And then like that track. So unless you specifically tell it to actually follow the chords, it won't follow the chords unless you have that enabled from the chords under the inspector. And just see what should I do if I don't want the chord track to audition any of the tracks in the project, even not the enable record track. So right now, if I have this with no data on it, and let's say I'll just move these chords earlier in time, and I audition, let's say I just kind of play. So it's going to audition the chord because it's going to be set to record enable. But if you don't want that to function at all, try just muting the chord track just right there. Then as soon as I unmute it, it'll play back. But if the chord track is muted, then it'll just kind of, the chords will be there for editing purposes, but it's not going to sound the chord track out. Unmute it, it will. Mute it, and it won't. So just try to mute the chord track. Okay. Question from Ace. Greg, I have a wave recording of real drummer, basic stuff, bass right, bass, I guess hi-hat, open, close some toms. How can I convert the wave into MIDI and assign groove agent sounds? So, you know, the hi-hats can sometimes be a little tricky with that, but you could just kind of use some of the, you know, the hit points for the different parts. So let's say if I have drums in this project here, and I have a instance of groove agent in the project, and if I wanted to trigger the sounds in groove agent from the parts, I could just select my kick. We would go to hit points. Let's edit our hit points. And now what we want to do is just kind of have your hit points where the sounds are to kind of eliminate bleed. And we'll say create MIDI notes. And what I want to do is I'm going to have this track selected, my drums. So once I have that done, I'll say create MIDI notes. And I want to put this on C1. And we could retain a dynamic velocity. So now my kick is just triggering my sample. And if I want to do that with my snare, so I'll just take a quick look at it. So we're not going to have different parts splitting through. Okay. And at this point, what I want to do is just say, let's create MIDI notes again. And let's put this onto D1, hit OK. And now as we play, I could mute my kicks. And now we're just hearing the MIDI. So at this point, I could just take that kick. So once you kind of just find the hit points, just click on from the hit points inspector tab, click on create MIDI notes. And at that point, that will automatically just kind of create those as MIDI events on a particular track. So give that a shot. So it could be a little trickier with hi-hats, and it may not detect, you know, open and close hi-hats. But a lot of times I found that, you know, just replacing the drums and leaving the cymbals very natural, you know, can give you great effects with that. Okay, so we have Jay from Connecticut. 2 quick questions. Did you receive the email to Steinberg, which I BCC'd you on? So yeah, I saw the email. So let me know if you don't hear from anyone at the office. Sometimes those letters can get passed on to different types of people. So I may be able to expedite that if you don't hear back from them. And second question, is it possible to remove reverb, delay, other from audio clip using Spectral Layers Pro? I've seen some people be, you know, successful with it. But let's say if I have, I'll just put on, maybe just a quick, I'll just do a new project here. And let's just put a sound with too much reverb on it. Let's see if this All right, so if I wanted to put too much reverb on this signal, I'll just record some parts really quickly in. Okay, and I will go ahead and put just a quick verb on that. So we'll just come over here to audio inserts and let's put too much reverb. So let's say if I will choose to just quickly render this in place. So we'll do complete signal path. Okay, so now as we listen to this particular sound, I will just solo that track. And let's go to our extensions. I haven't tried de-reverbing something, but I think it could be done in Spectral Layers. I saw a video on it. We'll see how that sounds. So definitely a little better, but let's just say I'll do the reverb reduction again. I'll just do it a couple times here. So you could definitely kind of, use Spectral Layers to accomplish that. And then, it could be, you may get better results on certain tracks than others, but, there's, definitely kind of a de-reverber algorithm in there. Okay, so a question: how can I create my own custom template in Cubase? So really, once you have kind of your project set up, so say, okay, we wanted, 16 audio tracks. I wanted to have, these instruments all loaded up. So say I want to add an instrument track. I wanted to add, 4, let's say 8 Italian Sonic SEs. And then let's say I wanted a retro log, and once you kind of have everything set up and configured as you want, at that point, all you have to do is go to File and then choose save as template. So we'll save it as a template. We'll just call this November 3rd. Sorry. I think I took a screenshot accidentally. November 2020. So I'll come over here, hit OK. And then when I go to do a new project, we'll choose new project. At this point, you can see it under more, and then you could see your templates, your user-defined templates right there. So once again, just go over to File to save as template. So a question from Ted. Hi, Greg. Can we expect new Q&A with Greg Undo videos soon? So yeah, there will be kind of a series of new videos coming out. I think you may see some new ones next week. So, okay. And if you have any particular topics you want to see covered, Ted, let me know, and we could try to incorporate those. Okay, it's reading through. Okay, question: how to add high and low pass filter in Cubase? So if we have a audio track, so let's say if I come here, we could go to kind of the let's say if I select the track and we go to the channel EQ. At this point, you'll see just in the pre section where you could have kind of and you could choose, if you want this to be, up to 48 dB per octave. So, and all you have to do is kind of enable it, and then you could just kind of slide over. So that will be your high pass filter or a low cut. And then you also have a high cut as well. So you could just kind of bring that down. So this is where you could do it just in the pre section. So if you go to the channel EQ, you could just come there and save all of those. That's your high cut, low cut filter, or high pass, low pass, just kind of, but it's labeled as your low cut, which is your high pass filter. And so you could just edit directly there within the channel strip. Okay, that's okay, going on. So lots of great introductions still. Okay. Okay, so nice comment from Peter in London. Hello from London, England. Many thanks for sharing all your knowledge with us, Greg. Have learned so much from the Hangouts. All the best, Peter. That's great. Thank you for the kind words. I'm glad that they're useful. Learning new tips and tricks. Okay. Okay, question. I'm struggling trying to configure external effects in Cubase 10 Pro using Zoom Live Track 12 as audio interface. So when you're dealing with external effects, a lot of times, what Cubase is going to need is the ability to have inputs and outputs. So if we have like an external effects processor, such as a reverb or a favorite compressor, EQ, at this point, we could go to your audio connections. Let's go to your external effects here. And we could, add an external effect. You can add external effects here. So we have a number that we've added from previous Hangouts. So let's say if I have a DBX compressor, and what you need to have is for it to be connected to an input and an output. So Cubase will send the signal out of the output as part of the audio interface outputs. It goes into the input of the external processor, let's say a DBX, and then the output of the compressor would then go directly to an input on your particular audio interface. Now, sometimes I believe the Zoom Live Track, I'm not that familiar with it, it's an audio interface, and it may capture multiple inputs, probably 12 if I were to guess by the name, but it may not have discrete audio outputs. So a lot of times, those devices could be intended to capture. So you would need to have an actual output, a lot of interfaces may have like 8 in, 8 out, or 4 in, 4 out. And you could use, 2 of the outputs for your monitor system, probably speakers, often powered speakers, and 2 if you have an extra 2 outputs that are addressable. So when you go to your outputs tab here, you should just make sure that you're going to an output that's addressable via the software driver. And you need to make sure that you have that set up. If you have a physical output for an effects unit or like an insert on the mixer, there's a good chance that may not be an addressable output that can be seen by its audio drivers. So sometimes it may have analog connections that work with the analog portion of the mixer, but may not be able to be set up as part of the audio input stream and outputs. So make sure that you actually have a selectable discrete output when you're using it with a mixer like the live track. And if you have that and everything still isn't working, the one thing that may make a difference is going into your studio setup and making sure select the audio interface here. Sometimes if you have direct monitoring turned on and off, you may want to toggle that setting. But I think it's probably going to be that there may not be discrete multi outputs on the Zoom. But check that out. I think that should help. All right, so we had a question from Nick about surrounds, and I'm just going to look it up real quick. He had emailed it to me earlier. Bear with me just for a second while I find Nick's question. Thanks for all the great questions, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure that you do that. And also, if you give a thumbs up to the video, that's always helpful as well. That enables us to keep doing these types of videos. All right, so we had a question from Nick earlier. Okay, he says, I want to be able to switch back. He's working in 5.0. I want to be able to switch back to stereo monitor. So I have control room set up for my stereo monitor. Stereo left and right is outs 1 and 2 in interface. When I go to create a 5.0 monitor, I'm unable to use 1 and 2 in my left and right in the 5.0. Cubase is saying it's being used already. Is there a tutorial on this? So what you want to do if you're working in surround is to actually, so when you're going to your setup here, so I'll go to my audio connection setup, and we have our control room. Like currently I have these monitors set up for mix left and mix L and R. So if I wanted to go to another mixer, I could do that, but it could be contingent upon a preference. So Nick, go to your preferences, and under control room, you want to deactivate exclusive device ports for monitor channels. So if I have that checked, then I'll get kind of a message that I can't, the selected device port is used already. So that way it's not going to be duplicative, so it's not going to be sending out twice. So once again, go to your preferences and go to control room and uncheck deactivate device ports or exclusive device ports for monitor channels. And then just hit apply, and then you should be able to use it for both your stereo and your 5.1. And another question related to this also is the procedure for setting up a session to create a 5.0 group channel and route everything to that. I think I understand how to do the mix down in stereo by creating a send on a 5.1 stereo out. So if you're doing like a surround project, probably what you want to do is, as you're working with it, so you go, let's say we'll do a new project. We'll see if my Mac wants to wake up here. All right. And we want to, you don't have to create a 5.0 group. You can obviously do that. But let's say, I want to have my audio connections. I wanted to make this be So I'll remove this bus, and let's add, let's say, a 5.1 bus. I know you're using 5.0. And now when I add an audio track, it's going to be routed to my 5.1 out. So let's say if I have a stereo track, I wanted to add a mono track. So now when I add these, they're being routed to my my surround bus, and I could double click and be able to mix either of the channels directly in surround. So I could, again, just come right over here and place the mono source in surround. And once you do that, you probably also want to, for the first surround output, for your first, when you go to the first monitor, is to just make sure that your monitor, the first one, I think needs to be set up for when you go to add a monitor, make sure that you have that as your 5.1. And then that should make probably, more sense in your control room. So but you don't have to do that. So once you have the 5.1 output and the tracks are routed to the 5.1 out, then you have kind of the free ability to pan. So give that a try, Nick, and I think that will help you out. All right, I'll just go back and change my connections quickly. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back to our Hangout questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay. Okay, so a question from, can you tell me more about the instrument track and how to record the actual audio in real time versus just MIDI data and then doing a render? So if I have an instrument track set up here, so I'll just do a quick Callion Sonic. Okay, so let's say I have let me just see if I get my controller to wake up here. Sorry about this. All right, my MIDI controller doesn't want to seem to cooperate. Let me just jump back to maybe another project. All right, so I'll just do it with a software controller. So I'll just hit Option K, or sorry. So I'll do my virtual keyboard. All right, so right now I could record MIDI information. But if I wanted to record both MIDI and audio simultaneously, we could do this, and could be a little bit of a roundabout way of doing it. But if I wanted to add a group track, so let's say I'll add a group channel to the selected channel. So let's make it a stereo group. So now when I play, we'll see both the audio here. Sorry. So the audio output of the electric piano is going to the group. And I wanted to now add an audio track, and let's make it a stereo track. And I wanted to set its input from group 1. So at this point, I could record, I will record enable both tracks. And then you could record the MIDI information on this track, take the audio output of that instrument to a group, add an audio track and set its input from the group. And then you could record both audio and the MIDI simultaneously. Okay, going through some more questions. We're still in the introduction phase. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so a question, Greg, is it important to do Variaudio editing without things on the inserts? Should you bounce the track after Variaudio, then have other things on the insert at the track? You could definitely, it doesn't really matter having Variaudio on on with insert track, so it doesn't really have an effect on that. So if I just wanted to open up this project, I probably have different processing and inserts and channel strips on the vocal here. Computer is running slowly today. Sorry. Give it another second. If not, I will do a quick force quit. All right. Seems to be loading out projects slowly for some reason. Okay, so when we look at this particular project, so I will have, different, we'll look at our channels. I'll have EQ, and I have a number of different channel strips on it. And there's really, no reason to not have your effects. It's all going to be delay compensated. So it doesn't, there's no penalty for having processing on as inserts. And then, so probably the second part of the question was, should you bounce the track after Variaudio and then have other things on the insert at the track? So you don't have to bounce. It's only if your computer was running very slowly for some reason, but there's no need to, worry about, effects on or off when using Variaudio. Okay, so we have a question from Jan. Sorry, my chat session just jumped way ahead. Bear with me just a second. Okay, almost back to where we were. So question, how to keep lock the ARP pattern Flexphraser in Hallian 6 when changing a patch. My workaround is to use the Hallian 6 record out to MIDI. So I think once we have kind of a patch that's in Hallian, so say with the Flexphraser, so let me just load up an instance of Hallian quickly. Sometimes that Flexphraser could be saved within the patch. So I'll just, I think there's some nylon guitar with some Flexphrasers in it. And let me see. I'll just kind of come over here and let's take a look kind of in the MIDI editor part of it. Sorry, my MIDI controllers decided to stop functioning on me. Let me see if I could get it reset. Bear with me just a second. Okay, so I think I have my controller back. Maybe not. All right, so my Nectar controller is not cooperating today. All right, so so I think that when you get into the different some of the different parts with the the Flexphraser, so I will just come right over here and let me just turn on my virtual keyboard and see. That the Flexphraser is going to be kind of at the patch level. So when we go into kind of the different so I will add so that's going to be kind of stored at the patch level, and so if you're switching patches, your best bet may be to just kind of as you described for your workaround, but that sound will be actually just stored kind of on a patch by patch basis. Okay. So question from Matthias. Okay, how can I initialize all effects, EQs, channel strips at one track with one command so that the track is initialized? So let's come over here. Let's just add an audio track. So let's say if we have a number of different settings with our channel strip. And let's say I adjust the panning here. So let's see if I just click on reset channel. That looks like it did it. So if you just come to this little drop down menu, you should just see the reset channel. So let's say again, so if I have a lovely EQ, I have different insert effects. I wanted to have my channel strip. And all of these that are set, go to the little drop down menu and just choose to reset channel. And I'll just, so that should do the trick for you. Okay, so we have Australia, so we have 5 continents. Okay, so first time, welcome to the Hangout. So question, how do you change the color of the waveform in the lower zone instead of black with gray background from Sydney, Australia? So let's go ahead and, so when I look at in the lower zone, we could see, some of our different parts here. So when I double click, I will just turn off the hit points. It's going to just kind of take the color from the part here, but there are some preferences. So if you wanted to come here, you could go to user interfaces and then under color schemes. So if you wanted to adjust like, the editor background area, you could just, like if you wanted this to be much brighter, or brighter, you could adjust it like so. If you wanted it to be, darker, I think it may be around there by default. You could adjust accordingly. For waveforms, there's a number of different settings as well. So when you go to your audio, you could adjust the waveform brightness. So if I wanted to adjust that down, you could kind of see that, some of the different effects. So let's say I'll take my waveform brightness down. So I could apply that. And let's take a look maybe. So you can see that this will become dark. But going again to preferences, and let's say if I want like white waveforms, like I've kind of set this up, we could adjust kind of there or somewhere in the middle, which I think is the default state, and you could choose the waveform outline intensity as well. So if you want it to be outlined and bright to kind of clarify. You could also adjust, how the fade handles will be, displayed as well. So there's a number of different preferences in event display audio or the editor backgrounds to kind of change the colors as you see fit. So try experimenting with some of those. And welcome to your first Hangout. I got to go to Sydney once, loved visiting that city. One of my favorite places I've traveled to. So we have a question from Ted. Am I correct to presume a software company like Steinberg is still 90% functional with employees working from home, even with Germany now locked down for health concerns? That's I think that actually the company has probably been, ironically, maybe more productive with people working at home. Their infrastructure was set up, they had, really high quality of digital infrastructure pre-pandemic. So I think, pretty much every, product release, and you can see we've done a number of different products, from, they've all kind of been on schedule or ahead of schedule. So I don't think you'll see any development delays based on pandemic. So, so kudos to Steinberg in Germany for, I think everyone's really kind of stepped up their game and is doing, wonderful work still, despite if it's, they're not actually physically in the office. So there's lots of Microsoft Teams meetings, but for a lot of the software developers, I think, and from what I've heard, they, are being probably maybe a bit more productive working at home, and working, different hours that, software developers would work. Okay. Okay, so you just see, hello from Texas. Question: how do I assign audio to a MIDI drum track I recorded with an Alesis DMK2? So if the MIDI has been recorded directly into the program, we could, just let me just think if we jump to maybe another project. Let's see if we can do this quickly. So if your MIDI is recorded in, so let's say if I have just a quick instance of Groove Agent here. All right, so I'll look at the right thing now. So we'll come over here. So let's say we have our pattern here. So I'll just quickly record this. So I'm just going to say we're going to take the MIDI from Groove Agent, and let's imagine that we played this in. So as we played in, I'll go ahead and just start the pattern here. All right, so I hit record, and now this pattern, let's say this is coming directly from your drums. Okay, so we have our drums kind of directly as our part here. So now, if we wanted to look at this in our drum editor, we could just come right here, look at it in our drum editor. So we have let's say our drums have been recorded directly from the Alesis. So, it really could matter if it's where the drum sounds are. So when you say assign audio to a MIDI drum track, so if you're using the internal sounds of the Alesis, if you're kind of using the brain and the sounds of the Alesis, you will have to record the audio outputs, connect the audio outs of the Alesis unit directly to audio inputs on your audio interface. If you wanted those to be split, you would have to connect your kick and snare and hi-hats and toms, through different outputs. A lot of times people will take the Alesis, so you take your MIDI information, you play back the MIDI data that is sent to the Alesis where it's generating sounds. And then sometimes people will just take a stereo mix out of the Alesis unit and record that as audio kind of in real time. So, I see a lot of people may record audio, like a stereo audio and MIDI from electronic drums. That's pretty common. It doesn't give you as much flexibility, but sometimes a lot of the electronic drum brains don't have multiple outputs. So it may have just like a stereo out or maybe 4 outputs. So it may not be enough outputs. So you could record, the audio and MIDI simultaneously. But if it's going directly to an instrument kind of like Groove Agent here. So I'll just put this quickly into like a loop. So let's say as we play this, and if I want to do like processing on my particular instrument, you could come here and just say, okay, so let me just set kind of the loop point there. So let's say we have this going on. And we see everything is now going out of a one stereo output. But at this point, we could say, okay, I want to take, my snare out of output 2, my hi-hat out of output 3. And as I assign the output here, it's automatically placed directly into the mixer. So if I want to have my room mics out of output 4, let's say my overheads out of output 5, at this point, you could just have all of your different drum sources kind of all being just mapped directly to their individual outputs here. And this would allow you to do further processing. So if you could let me know if the sounds are actually coming from like a software instrument or from the Alesis, but with the Alesis, you would have to record the audio, as you could record the audio as you play the MIDI. If you have multiple outputs, you could connect like 8 outputs from your drum brain, if it has that, to 8 inputs of your audio interface if you want them all in discrete channels. So you could do stuff like that directly from your Alesis. And if you're just capturing the MIDI data and playing it back through something like Groove Agent or other drum programs, you could, just do individual routings like this and have your individual effects and have a lot of flexibility. Okay. Okay, see, I'm La Leche from Pablo. That's good. All right, good to see Gareth in a hangout. He's liking the deranged tool. So we see a question, Cubase 11 soon. I'm sure that there's people that are working on it. So, but we'll see when it comes out. So, okay, good to see. All right. And as Gareth mentions, Cubase 11 question only 12 minutes in. So that's good. So it's better to have people asking for Cubase 11 than not to ask for your upcoming release. So we'll take it as a compliment. All right, good to see Millard Brown on a hangout. Okay, question. In Windows, is there any way of handling multiple audio interfaces? So there really isn't a good way. Some people use ASIO for all, and that kind of allows you to take Windows drivers and it kind of allows it to work as an ASIO device, and some people will stack that way. But the problem with using multiple audio interfaces on your computer is that there's really no way to properly synchronize. Programs like Cubase need to know exactly when the audio is going in and out to play back everything in sync to make sure that everything is working. So if you have different buffer sizes on interfaces, different capabilities on interfaces, if there's no way for, let's say if you're doing, those 44,100 or 192,000 samples per second, if there's no way for those to be synchronized, that could lead to a lot of problems. So that's why, so some people have tried using ASIO for all, and I think most of the people who have tried it have found it to be a pretty unsatisfactory experience. But, as you look for audio interfaces, try to think of interfaces that will have more inputs and outputs, than you need, because it just makes it a bit more future-proof, or has like different expansion capabilities, like an ADAT in where you could get an external converter to give you 8 additional inputs and outputs. Okay. All right. So we see Jazz Dude on a hangout. It's probably been on for a long time. Great to see you. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. I have a question. Say I upgraded from Cubase 6 to Cubase 10.5 on Windows. I can't find anywhere how I can see the master fader on the right side of the mixer at all times, so I don't have to scroll. All right, so this is a very handy thing, and this kind of changed in version 7. So if I always want to see my right hand my master fader kind of fixed on the right hand side. We could just go to the visibility tab and then click on zone. So the visibility tab upright and then click on zones. And you see these 3 dots. We'll see my input output channels. So we could basically have a split console where you could have tracks that are on the left hand side that will be fixed, in the center, or on the right. So now I have that dot on the right. At this point, my master fader will always be visible as I scroll in my mix console. So once again, go to, from the inspector tab, click on visibility. Once you click on visibility, go to zones at the bottom. You'll see 3 dots. So if you want it anchored to the left, click on the left dot. In the center part of the console, click on the center dot, or the right to move that directly to anchor it into the right hand zone. Okay, so a question from Ace. Greg, my E-licenser had broken in half, but I taped it together and still works. If I purchase another E-licenser, can I copy from one to the other and leave them both plugged in my desktop and laptop? So you have one single license, and that license, you could transfer the license from one computer to, or from one E-licenser, one USB E-licenser to another USB E-licenser. And that's just within the E-licenser program, just literally dragging and dropping the license from one to the other. So from one E-licenser to the other E-licenser, you'll see both of them installed. Purchasing another E-licenser doesn't necessarily split that license to run it at 2 different locations. But just if you purchase a new E-licenser, I think in the US they're $35 or something like that. At that point, you could transfer it to your fresh new E-licenser and then move that back and forth. And you see Ace mentioning is he broke it from constantly moving it from desktop to laptop. So, one of the things that I do on mine is, every time I just connect it into like a small extension cable, or for my travel rig, I just have it installed into a USB hub and I just connect the hub, so I just got, I think at, United States, we have an electronics store and home appliances called Best Buy. So I think, I spent a whopping $6 on a USB hub with a cable that's attached to it. And I just connect that and leave the E-licenser kind of plugged in. And so I don't worry about it. Okay, so we see Paul Leone, or Paula Lone Music, checking in from Portland, Oregon. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Just read it. Will changing buffer sizes from low for recording and higher for exporting cause any stress on my computer? What do you think the best practice should be? So many people will actually, record at lower latencies and lower buffers, and then for mixing, raise the buffers, especially as you're adding more virtual instruments, more effects. So, that's kind of the general principle that a lot of people will do. And it could depend upon your audio interface. And if it has direct monitoring and onboard DSP, that will allow you to have effects like our UR interfaces, or MR816 is kind of the first in that series. So, but that's, so it's not going to cause any stress kind of changing your buffer. So, as the buffer is lower, the computer works harder. As the buffer is raised, that kind of allocates more resources for your computer to do more processing. So again, most people will have a lower buffer for tracking initially, especially audio stuff, and raise the buffer for mixing and kind of as you're starting to add tracks where it's not as critical. Okay, so question, how do I set up a Iwi USB controller in Cubase 10.5 Pro? So as long as you have the the drivers installed for the Iwi, all you have to do is it'll show up when we go to, you'll see if you go to your studio setup to MIDI port setup, you should see the Iwi controller listed as soon as it's being recognized by the operating system. So for the MIDI timing, Cubase will use the computer operating system drivers. So once it's connected, you should see it show up here. When you go to record MIDI information, all you have to do is set, it should be included in the all MIDI inputs, but you should see the Iwi listed as your device here and just hit record. So there's really nothing special you have to do for the Iwi controller. So congratulations on getting an Iwi. Those are kind of fun. I haven't worked with one in a long time, but I used to do it a lot. All right, so if generate harmony voices based on chord track, after a while lines change, soprano sing higher, still in key, but higher voices, same for tenor, other vocal. I want a same line during song. Okay, so just reading through this again. Okay, so if you need to change, harmonies within, so let's say if we've generated harmonies for a project, I will just kind of jump to this project quickly. I was going to see if I could turn the volume down remotely on my son's TV show. Bear with me just a second while I get this loaded up. Okay, so I'm going to generate quickly a harmony track from this. So I will take this piano part and I will just generate chords. Okay, so we have this, and now I'll just kind of take a phrase here. And since we have the chords from the piano part, I will just come over here and let's generate the harmony voices. If I go to the right menu, that would help. Okay. Okay, so now we've generated harmonies that are musically correct based on the chords from the piano. Okay, so let's come over here and I'll just kind of bring these down in volume just a hair. Okay, so it says if generate harmony voices in a chord track, after a while lines changes appear, soprano sing higher, still in key, but higher voice. Same for tenor and other vocals. I want same line during the song. So if we select all of these and let's go to our editor. All right, and I'll just go to the Variaudio. So I think we had it here. So you can, freely move, the notes around like this. So as you work with it. And if you notice that if you mention the white line. So once you click there, you could actually those will be for the different voices that have been created. And as you do this, you may notice that, it may just kind of snap back, and it may seem like you can't edit these. But if we go to the harmony parts here, we could choose. So say I'll take my soprano part. Let's go to the chords, and I'll just set the voicings to off for each of the tracks. And now as we go into our editor again, now you're able to kind of freely move these. As you wanted to change the harmonies around. So, and where you see kind of the white lines, it's kind of figured out kind of what the harmonies should be. So I could just kind of come here, and for each of the voices. So I select this, and now I could move that. So let's say if I move it to a red note, bad. So you could just simply kind of come here, but make sure that, if you want to move it, so you may see the other white lines, and what it's done is it's automatically kind of figured out the chords for the rest of the audio file. But if you want to freely move the voices, select the track, and then under the chords, you could just set the voicing modes to off, and then it could be freely moved. But if I misunderstood your question, just let me know. Okay, so question, can you convert MIDI tracks to instrument tracks and vice versa? So if we, it kind of starts off, you pick either or. So, if it's an instrument track, that's only going to be going to a virtual instrument, but a MIDI track is going to be routed to, could be sent to a virtual instrument or to an external instrument. If you do run into issues where, okay, it's a MIDI track and you wanted to change it to an instrument track instead, just add an instrument track. So let's say I want to do the grand. We could load up, your sample. So let's say we go with the Yamaha C7. So now I have the instrument track here, and then I could just copy and have, that data directly on the event. So that's how you can do it. But there isn't a real way of just saying, so figure out what you want to work with. And I see a lot of people have gravitated towards, instrument tracks for virtual instruments and MIDI tracks for external. And so at that point, you may not have to change as much. Okay, so we have question, how to make all played notes of different length into same length using Project Logical Editor or any other shortcut. So let's say if I have all right, so let's say if I just have a couple of notes here with different lengths. There's a couple ways you could come here, and let's see if so just extending the line will still kind of keep their relative lengths. So I know that we could quantize. So if we go to the advanced quantize, we could just say quantize the MIDI ends. So if I want to do this, let's say to whole notes, so edit, advanced quantize, you can say let's quantize the MIDI lengths. That will automatically do the lengths of the notes. But I think there may be another way, if I remember right. Let's see if I can. We'll try a different modifier key. So that still keeps it. So, but try the, try just the quantize length. You could also probably select all of the events here and just say length. So say if I just set this to one measure, it's still kind of relative. So let me just, so try the quantize MIDI lengths or quantize MIDI ends, and that should get you there. Maybe, I'm trying to remember if there's a little editor thing to snap kind of the, so if these are all kind of at different lengths, we could snap those, but try just quantizing. That'll get you there. Okay, so we have a question about lanes. For instance, I record 3 takes audio. I will always have an additional 4th lane, which is empty. Why is that? So often, when people are doing lane editing, so let's say if I wanted to come here, and I'll just do a quick. Let me just set up a quick loop recording. Okay, so I will just kind of put this into a cycle, and then we'll do a couple passes here. All right, so we did 4 passes, and we see this, that it's going to give you kind of an empty lane, because a lot of times people may choose to copy different elements into a lane, or it gives you the kind of a little bit of a buffer if you wanted to take a part of a different file to put in. So that's kind of the intention of that, so that if you have other recordings maybe on different tracks, that you have a space to do that, because otherwise I don't think you could actually add a lane. So it just gives you a little more flexibility for editing. All right, good to see Michael Teams on a Hangout. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. In order not to lose any audio, can you explain where to set the paths of each audio file in your favorite hard disk before setting a recording in a project? So one of the things that I personally like to do is when I do a new project, you have 2 choices. The default is to use default location, which will kind of place it into your music category of your computer, which is probably not where you would expect. It's kind of like where your MP3s would be stored. But on the new project, I always choose prompt for project location. And at this point, we'll say create empty. Now, when this pops up here, this is the folder where all of my audio files for this particular project will be stored. So I'll just say, let's come over here. I want to put it into this folder. And now all of my files will be stored in that particular folder. And it's always advisable to have all of your audio files used in a particular project in the same folder. So, and have a unique folder for each song or project. So once again, come over here, get a file to new project. And once you just check prompt for project location, that will stick. And always just be aware when you're starting a new project, have a unique folder for each project. Okay, so we have a question: how to render and place multiple tracks into one audio track, like audio mixdown, but not exporting the tracks out so it's within the project, if you get what I'm trying to say. So if we do this, we could, do that a couple of different ways. So let's jump over to this project. So if you don't want to use the, export audio mixdown, so, if you want it, you could do the export audio mixdown, and a lot of people miss this, but there is a little function where you could say create audio track. So at this point, I could say, I wanted to, let's say, just solo my drums. And let's say I'll just quickly do just a couple of measures here for time's sake. So I want to do a stereo mix down. I've soloed my drums, and I can say, let's create an audio track. So I will just come here. We'll call drum mix down. All right. And when I say insert into pool, when I say create, and just check create audio track. So you could, do an export audio mix down. It's now going to be placed probably at the bottom of your project. And there's my drum mix laid out for me right there. So that's one way you could do it with it, but you mentioned that you don't want it to export, but there could be people that don't know about that. So if I wanted to do that, let's say for a number of tracks, let's say I'll take these and I'll just make them shorter in time. So if I wanted to mix down these files, and let's say these tracks here, we could also do a render in place. So say, let's go to our render settings. And once we have kind of our channel, depending on your configuration. So if you say, let's do the channel settings, you could say mix down to one file. And here you could just choose render. And that will render all of those particular files that were selected into a new stereo mix down of those particular files. So that's two ways of being able to do it. Okay, so question: do you expect to travel to Santa Monica for in-person C11 tutorials for Team Zimmer when it's finally released, or anywhere else for that matter? So our travel for, our corporate travel has kind of been rescinded until end of our fiscal year, which is April 1st. So we may be doing, we're kind of not doing a lot of travel for, safety reasons during pandemic. But luckily, software lends itself really well. You could say I've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings recently, and just kind of like this, but for private sessions for different composers and producers. So we've been, luckily, software lends itself to that. I know Hansen has been they're just kind of wrapping up a project, I think, any day now. So I'm sure as new stuff comes out that we'll be able to do stuff. But, just like we do these Hangouts for a broad number of people, we're able to do a lot of these sessions remotely via Zoom as well. So. Okay, so let's get to the next question. Okay, so hello, is there a way to draw CCs freely, like not taking account of the quantized value for CC1? Thank you very much. So I'll just add a MIDI track, or I'll just add an instrument track rather, just quickly. Okay, so let's say I'll just make the MIDI window bigger. So let's say if we have our snap set to, let's say our snap is currently set to quarter notes. So, if I want, or for whole notes, so let's say I just want to draw in some modulation wheel, So all you have to do is, if you want to turn snap off, is just hit the letter J. And then you could just draw in freely. And then hit J again, that will turn the snap on. So looks like once you, so let's say I have snap enabled, and we can see that here. And if I turn that off, and then it'll now just kind of jump back to snap. So just hit J, and that will temporarily disable snap. And you could just draw it in kind of as you want freely. Okay, so I see Michael Teams is going to install Windows 10 after the Cubase Hangout. Good luck. I think you'll like it. Okay, so I see, let's see, from MR Flow Axe, which DAW? So this is a Cubase. So not sure if if I'm misunderstanding a question or maybe getting it out of context. All right, good to see Ben Shirley on a Hangout. Okay, going through. So question, why are some using an effects track to hold their effects plugins and some using a group track? So they're kind of functionally very similar. And, some people could get like really passionate and, very passionate about this particular issue, which that the effects tracks and plug-in and group tracks, the effects channels and group tracks are in essence the same. So it used to be that there were some differences in that if you route it to an effects group, I don't think that stands anymore. That we could do different panning options with an effects channel, but I believe that is really kind of the same. So there's really I think the one functional difference is if it's on a group channel and you wanted to record the output of the effect to its own dedicated channel. Like if you said, okay, I want a reverb on the voice and I wanted to be able to print just the reverb that's being sent to that voice easily. You could capture the audio output of the group channel, but not an effects channel. But really, functionally, they're going to be, 99% identical in functionality. And sometimes I think that people's decision might be kind of more heritage. It used to be that some, we used to have, like when Cubase VST came out in 1996, that we had like a virtual effects rack that was like in a rack and kind of followed that same paradigm, but didn't have effects return channels. So at that time, people gravitated to putting, effects on their groups before there was effects return channels. So some of those workflows still, like muscle memory, still get employed to this day for some long-term users. You can just see an interesting comment. Cubase kind of looks like Studio One. Could be probably the other way around. So, okay, so I see a question. Where do I ask questions? We could just ask the questions in the chat field, or you could email them in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, question. How can I easily switch the position of single notes of an audio track, for example, an acoustic guitar? Thanks in advance. So if we have, let me see, I think I may have a nice little acoustic piece that we could maybe utilize. Let me see if this is. So, as you want to, kind of, so if it's an audio file that we kind of look at, we could, come over here, and if it's, single notes, you could move those, pretty easily, especially if we go into free warp. So if I just wanted to go into my audio warp, at this point we could, adjust kind of the timing of different notes. So I could say, okay, let's put a warp marker here, warp marker there, and then you could, adjust the placement. But if it's, a single note within a chord, I know some people have tried Melodyne that could do that, and sometimes, not without, audible artifacts. But you could also sometimes get into like, if we go to your audio extensions, like a little add-on that Steinberg offers is the Spectral Layers, and this would allow you to kind of look at the audio and kind of, we look at our audio waveforms kind of like this, but this allows us to actually take the audio and see kind of a three-dimensional aspect. So if you have like a squeak or a particular note, we could just kind of look at it and we could see kind of the overtone series of notes. So sometimes when you move a particular note, you don't realize that the harmonics are also there. So here we could actually just kind of select the particular note and not only get the note itself, like one single note, but we could get each of the notes, the harmonic overtone series, and be able to, delete that and do stuff like that. So it's kind of a couple of things. So, if it's, you can move, pretty easy rhythmically, but if like one note is louder or softer, you would need to use something like Spectral Layers to really get into that. All right, seeing Michael Teams telling everyone to hit the like button, so we'll go ahead and honor his wish. Okay, so we see, hi Greg, thanks for all of that. Can you please show us how to create great harmony voices with an audio file, please? Thanks a lot. So we may have covered this a little earlier, but it's probably before the question or after the question. The question was probably asked before that, but we'll do it quickly again. So activate this project and revert it. Okay, so here I have like a piano part in my score. So we'll just look at it, let's say in our score editor. So what I want to do is kind of take this piano part where we have kind of the basis for our harmonies and chords. And I want to go to my project menu and go to the chord track, and we'll say create chords based upon that piano part. So once we've done that, so let's say I'll just take that phrase right there where she says leading a lie, I think. Living a lie. Okay, so I have that selected. Now that we have the chords defined from the piano part, it could generate harmonies based upon those chords. So I will go to my audio menu and, I'll select just that particular part and go to audio and say generate harmony voices. So we will now just come over here and say there's our, different harmony voices that have been kind of created. So as soon as I select that, and at this point we could have all of our chords. Let me just find a part of the song where we were. Okay. So now those chords. And at that point, we could just choose. And if you have the color scheme here based upon the chords, what you're able to do is you see like blue notes are within the scale, green notes are within the actual chord, and red notes will be out, So as you wanted to experiment with different harmonies, you could just kind of move around. So, just some different things that you could try pretty easily. But, it helps to know what the chords are, and then it could generate the harmonies based upon those chords. Okay, so I see from Alex, hello, transpose one tone or one semitone. So if you wanted to transpose all of the parts, like, one tone or one semitone, I could select all the events. So if I wanted to take like the voice here, and, so say if I wanted to just take this, we could add a transpose track. And let's say I wanted to just transpose. Let's see where all right. So at that point, I will just say, let's go up one semitone. So as we do this, and this would be kind of global. Let's have it go back to our root right right here. So that's one quick way of going one tone, going one semitone up and down. All right, so I see is Cubase 11 going to incorporate vertical zoom. So, you can hold down to Shift G and Shift H to do vertical zoom quite easily. So you could do G and H for horizontal, Shift G and H for vertical. So G, H, Shift H, Shift G. So you can kind of do that now. Okay, so question, is there a way to change speed like in time stretch, for example? Stretching my clip would change speed and pitch. So if we wanted to, let me just do like a new project. There's a couple ways to approach this. Okay, so just drop that loop in. So let's say okay, so one of the little tools that you could do, I think some people do this through offline processing. So if you wanted to, at this point, let's go to the processes. And let's say, I think we could just choose to do a pitch shift. So if I wanted to just take and the trick is to just kind of do that without time correction. So if we undo that, so I'll just delete that. And let's say I just wanted just a portion of it to be processed at this point. You get a process and just go to pitch shift. And we can say, okay, I want this starting at 0. And I just want that part to be kind of stretched down. So let's say, so now I'll just take that particular range, pitch shift, and as we listen to it now, and if you want to do it on a very short segment, again, you could just kind of select just, I want only that part to do the pitch shift. So, you could do different things there. There's also, you could place this into, if we have a tempo track, if we want this to be kind of like an analog tape, I could we'll select this file, place it into musical mode, and the algorithm that we could use on this. We could choose it to be tape. And as we kind of play back, and if I wanted to speed up or slow down, I could enable kind of the tempo here. And then let's just go ahead and draw in, let's say, a ramp down to here. And as we do this, this would change the pitch. So if I say, okay, let's start here. So now the pitch will go up, kind of like speeding up, doing a very speed playback on an analog tape machine. So those are a couple ways that you could approach it. You could also do some stuff in, if you go to Loop Mash FX. So let's come over here to just like an insert. And if you look under Other, you'll see Loop Mash FX, and then you'll have kind of different so you can do different drops, and you can change kind of the rate. So, and you could actually play that in real time via MIDI. So a couple ways to kind of all right, so seeing kind of your seeing Ted's suggestion for a Q&A topic. So I think you may, one's coming next week may help you with that. So okay, so I see a question. Is there a way to change speed with pitch, like in time of an audio clip? So I think we just covered that, but if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. But I think we just got that covered. Okay. Okay, and my chat field jumped way ahead. Bear with me just for a second. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. And also make sure you subscribe to the channel. Okay, so I think I lost some questions. I apologize for that. All right, so I see we had a question about the Zoom. I think the Live Track 12. So it has... So you see, thank you, Greg. Actually, Zoom has outputs USB 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Then you should be all set. Okay, question. Which is best platform, Mac or Windows? You know, it's really just kind of a personal preference. You know, Cubase runs great on either platform. You know, some people hate Macs and some people hate PCs. You know, it's really kind of whatever you're comfortable with. It's, you know, Cubase isn't... it runs equally well on either platform. Okay, so question. I just reinstalled my Cubase and now panning doesn't work anymore when I'm using my Steinberg driver with my UR22. When I'm using other driver, it is working. Do you know what could be the problem? Thanks. So I'm just... So when you say panning doesn't work anymore, so let's say if we have our audio file here and, you know, if we pan, so if that's not working, it could be that maybe the connections, you know, it could be that when we go to your audio connections that, you know, I've seen some people reverse these, like in our control room. It could also be if it's not panning anymore, that maybe in the control room, that down mix is set to mono. So now we get that. So make sure that those two things are kind of set. But it shouldn't be anything specifically with the UR22. And if it's a UR22C, it could be maybe slightly different, but where maybe the software mixer, there's a little control panel utility, and that maybe that is not set to be panned. So check those things. Okay, let's go through some more comments. Okay, so you see Greg McCarty from Portland, a long-time Hangout attendee. I think you may have been even on the first one. Hi, Greg from Greg in Portland. If I click on an event, it gets highlighted. Listen to it, then click stop. It always returns to the beginning of the event. Any way to change this? Okay, so let me just copy this a couple times. Okay, so when you kind of, click the event, the playhead goes to the beginning of the event, like so. So let me just, okay. So click on event, it gets highlighted, listen to it, then click stop. It always returns to the beginning of the event. So say if I come here and then hit stop, it'll go to the beginning. So this could be just if we want to change that behavior. It could be under transport, under preferences, transport to return to start position on stop. So while I'm doing this, and now if I hit the space bar, let's see if it's selected. Okay, I'm just going to check that preference one more time. Okay, so you said when it's selected, it will return. All right, so I'll stop now. Let me just check, see if there's any editing preferences. Let me just look under transport. I could be missing something, but I think I see what you're talking about, Greg. So when the event is selected, regardless of the preference, it'll just kind of jump back to that. Let's say if I deselect, click elsewhere, it'll stop. So it could be just because that event is selected. I could play around with it a little more, but if you wanted to change the behavior, let me just see if there's any other little preferences that might affect that behavior. I'll look under transport one more time. So I could do some more research on that, Greg, and see if I come up with anything. I'm probably just having a brain cramp on that, but I think I understand what you see going on. Okay, so I see, let's see if I install Cubase 10.5, can I take advantage of the grace period? So I guess we'll know soon. So we'll just have to kind of wait to see. All right. Hello, Greg. Could you please run through zooming in and out, returning to the same position after playback as playback moves so fast? So let's say if I'm zoomed in and out, so I'm just going to hold down, like, we'll zoom in as I hit play, and I'll choose to have this follow. So, and we'll just have kind of set for page scroll. So let's say if we do this, and again, kind of that preference, if you wanted to go back, is under the transport is to return to start position on stop. So let's say I'm at the beginning of this instance of it here. So that's where my playhead is. And now I zoom in, say close to the sample level. All right, so as I hit play, so now when I hit stop again, it returns to the same position. So if we zoom out a little bit, so as we do this, so imagine this, if we had it zoomed in, so hit stop, and the play position returns to the same. So whether it's kind of zoomed in heavily or not, it'll just play back from that same position. Again, you could kind of change that behavior under preferences, transport, return to start position on stop. So see if that makes sense, but if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. Right, reading through different comments. There's some more discussion on Mac versus PC. I always like to say that they're both fantastic and they both are terrible. So there's, but whatever you like, you could use. Okay, so question. Hi, can you explain creating buses and what would you put on your stereo out fader? Okay, so let's jump back to another project. So let's say if I wanted to take all of my drums and process them kind of as a collective entity in this particular project. So I will come over here. Let's say I want to take all of my drums and run it through a compressor. Or I wanted to EQ the drums as a whole. So I'll select all of my drums. And then I'm going to just add effects channel or add group channel to the selected tracks. So we'll make it a stereo bus. And now I could increase or decrease the volume of that particular track, of all my drums. And if I wanted to apply, let's say like a compressor, So that way we could take all the drums and be able to just compress them. Or now if I wanted to apply EQ, so instead of EQing each one individually, we could apply processing globally to that. And the second part of the question was, what would you apply like on a master fader? So a lot of people may do kind of like more surgical EQ if needed. So you could do something like frequency EQ is a great choice for that. But often people run like limiters, maximizers. So even if I wanted to just go to the channel strip here and take the whole mix, so I will just come and say, you know, if I wanted to run it through like a magneto, we're getting kind of tape saturation and overdrive, and maybe a maximizer. So those are common processes, you know, limiters, maximizers, some EQs. So those are some of the things that you could, so that's how you could add a bus and some typical processing people would put on their stereo out fader. Okay, so you see, is there any way to show pre-gain in Inspector? Okay, so let me just add a new audio track here. And let's say on this particular track, we want to add, I'm going to route this to nowhere. I'm just going to add like a signal generator. So we'll go to tools. Let's go to our test tone generator. So let's say we, on this particular track, we have our input source going at -12. So we see -12 on our fader indicated here. And I'm going to right click, and let's say I want to change the global meter settings to the meter position to input. Okay. So it's really looks like all you have to do. So when I change my metering options here, so and let's say I set it to post fader. So it's kind of global on the channel. So if you go into the mix console and you wanted to see the meters be pre-fader, all you have to do is right click, go to global meter settings, do the meter position, and set it to input. So give that a shot, and that looks like, so now I have this, you know, coming in. So when I change it to input, it's going to go blank because that's actually not the input channel. If I, you know, so just right click again to global meter settings and change it to post and change it there to input, and you should be all set with that. All right, so just see Andy LaSalle says, I love these classes. That's good. I'm glad it's Glad it's useful for people. Okay, just going through some more of the comments. Okay. So I just see a question. Can we expect major updates this winter? I'm sure that the Steinberg people are working on lots of things. So, okay. Why don't Steinberg make the E licenser out of steel the way iLok 3 is made? So, I know that there have been changes with the later generations of the E licenser to make them a bit more resilient. So I'm not privy of some of the manufacturing decisions on materials for the E licenser. So, but I could pass that all along. Okay, so I see what is an EWI? So an EWI is kind of an acronym for electronic wind instrument. So, and what that is kind of like a MIDI saxophone. So Yamaha made them, Akai had made them, and I'm sure other companies. So I think the Akai one was called an EWI. Okay, so question. My friend has a Cubase Artist and a Yamaha PSR 750 keyboard player. He would like to make music on Cubase using Yamaha's own sounds. Process. So really all you have to do, so if you're using the Yamaha, you need to use, probably are going to use a MIDI track. So you want to make sure that the Yamaha has MIDI communications. It probably, I'm not familiar with all of the PSR models, but it probably has either, if it's made within the last 15 to 20 years, it probably has a USB connection on it to the computer. So all you want to do is to add a MIDI track. You want to, at this point, make sure that you could choose all MIDI inputs. And if they're playing directly from their keyboard, it should see that if it has MIDI drivers. And then you want to make sure that the MIDI out is routed to the Yamaha PSR. So as you record the MIDI information, what it's going to do is it'll record the MIDI information out of the PSR that will get recorded into Cubase. Cubase sends the MIDI data back to the PSR to generate its sound. So often you hear keyboards often referred to as tone generators because Cubase will send the MIDI to the Yamaha and then the Yamaha is going to generate sound. As they're working, you're going to need some way of hearing the sound from the Yamaha PSR, whether it's going to be its internal speakers if it has it, which I think a lot of PSRs do, or, connecting it to a mixer of some sort with other keyboards. So, but just set it up as a MIDI track, set the right MIDI input and output, and then you should be able to have all the sounds from the PSR directly inside of Cubase. All right, so we have Byron checking in from Crystal Coast of North Carolina. Good to see you. Okay, so question, what is the difference between the Media Bay and Sample Browser? So when the Media Bay first came out, it could be a little kind of overwhelming to some people because you could just see so much. So what we have with the Sample Browser and Loop Browser is these are basically just going to be, make sure I have the right one. So it said Sample Browser. So this is say the Loop Browser. These will be kind of, scaled down versions of the Media Bay. So as we go to look at it, this way I'm only seeing kind of stuff that's available for loops. I'm not seeing like my project files. I'm not seeing video files. So these, when we could think of the media bay as being kind of the full scale, see everything, and the loop browser is going to be more for, quickly auditioning loops, and sound browser more for finding like, presets for different instruments. So these are just kind of, they're basically built upon the same information. It's a subset. The loop browser and sound browser are subsets of MediaBay that can be a little less intimidating for users to approach. Okay, question. Is there a convenient way of transferring MIDI CC automation like expression, modulation, velocity into the appropriate notation in the score editor? Thanks. So let's go ahead and let me jump projects here quickly. So often, as Cubase is this part may work. So if we have different, CC data here, so let's say we have some modulation in, and we now look at it in our score editor. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to look at this particular thing, so I think if we go to, dynamic mapping, let's put this in. So I think it's intended that, we could, let me just see if it's under, yeah, so I think once we're in dynamic mapping that those can be set. So let me just, I'm just going to forget where to access the different settings. But, it will translate the MIDI CCs. I'm just seeing. Okay, so this is kind of what so if you wanted to, so I think if you add the expressions in the notation view, that you could say, let's say if I go to my crescendo, you could right click under dynamic mappings, and then you could, have it change, send controllers. So let's say you wanted to send, controllers from, 40% to 100% for if it's, piano to, or let's say, to 80% for piano to fortissimo. So you could come over here and just, have it play back the different MIDI CCs. But I don't think that and I could experiment, but I don't think that the MIDI CCs that exist in the track will automatically generate kind of the notation, because it's not a direct correlation between the two. But if you wanted to just kind of put in, right at this point and say, okay, I want it, this to be dynamics of piano. And at that point, you could say when it goes to piano, I right click, we go to the dynamics mapping, and that will be 80% of the velocity. Then that's what's already on there. So I don't think it takes that information from the sequencer part and does that. But if you enter those different elements in the score editor, it could generate MIDI CC data. All right, so we have a nice message from Solid Gold Entertainment. Hi, Greg. Just want to say thanks. Your videos are always so helpful, and I learn something new every time I watch. From Northern Ireland. He loves his Cubase. That's great. So we have a question from Mandy Lane. Is Cubase really the best DAW? Yes. All right. Great question. Seems to work well for a lot of people. Okay, reading through. Okay, so a question. How do auto crossfades or manual crossfades differ when overlapping two separate events in an audio track? Example, sometimes I press X and the crossfade settings panel appears, but sometimes pressing X actually applies the crossfade indicator handles on the track. So, all right, so let's look at this guitar part here. And I'll just do a quick range edit on it here. So say I just have this part and I wanted to do crossfades. So, there's the crossfades you could set on, there's auto fade settings, and these will allow for any time a clip starts for it to play back a very short crossfade, let's say, and you could set the range there. So anytime that a clip kind of starts or ends, it could do auto fades. Now, if you wanted the events to crossfade, it won't kind of do this. It will overlap, and you'll probably hear a little pop or click between the two overlapping segments. So when you hit X, that will just do the crossfade. So it's not going to automatically do the crossfade when two events are overlapping. It has to be instantiated by hitting the X. Now, if there is a crossfade, so let's say if I just wanted to undo the setting. So now when I hit X, it'll put the crossfade in. And if I move it again and then hit the X, and let's say these timings have changed, when I hit X, and hitting it a second time will allow you to adjust the crossfades, to fine tune it. But if they already had kind of a crossfade in it, hitting X again. So if you hit it twice, generally you get, or if the events are already kind of crossfaded. So if you hit X once for clips that are already involved in a crossfade, it will take you to the X. But to do the initial crossfade is going to be manually done by hitting X. So as soon as I move it over here, they're not crossfaded, hit X, it is crossfaded, hit X again. We see the crossfade editor. If I want to move it again, then hitting X twice will open up the crossfade editor. If you come over here, do something, come here, hit X, since there's a crossfade that exists, that will open up the crossfade editor for you. All right, so I see from John McDonough. Hi, Greg. Why is it so difficult for me to get a hold of Steinberg support, as I've been having trouble getting into my Steinberg account? Each distributor, can have their own different support structure. So I'm not sure where you're located. I know in In the United States where I'm based, we have a team in Carmel, Indiana that's working full time with that. We also have, I think in Europe where Steinberg handles their own distribution, they do a lot of the support from out of the Hamburg office and different distributors. So it could be a little different. But if you want to, if you want to send an email and tell me where you're based, might be able to pass it on to the appropriate team. And then further comment, it says sending verification code, but it never arrives. Thanks for any insight you may have. So, make sure often, it could get flagged by like junk email filters. So, make sure that you go through all of your different, spam folders and junk email folders as well. All right, seeing Gareth mentioning Ian Kirkpatrick being kind of a pretty significant pop producer. That's a big Cubase junkie. Yeah, so I was just talking with Ian a couple weeks ago. So always a fun guy. Likes his coffee. Okay, so we have can you please go through a mixing in mono versus stereo advantage if you have a session to show, we can hear the difference. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and revert this project. As people are, having different listening environments, there's lots of people who listen to music on their phone, on an iPad, and until just recently, the iPads had just mono speakers. So, mono compatibility is, more important probably now than it has been in a long time. It used to be that people were very aware of mixing for mono if their material is going to be played on TV or AM radios. There used to be entire people. I had a friend, was telling me a story, in the 70s that, certain singles on his record, he had a bunch of hit singles, but certain ones he knew would be kind of more promoted on FM radio, and they would make sure to work on the stereo mix, and others would be more an AM radio thing, and they really concentrated on the mono capability. So for a while it became, stereo is pretty, is incredibly common. But, how you could, make your decisions is, let's say, if you wanted to switch, we could actually just listen to it in the control room. Because if you have a stereo source, a stereo mix, and it's way too wide, and you listen to it in mono, and you kind of lose entire sets of instruments or parts, that's not good. So within a control room, we have these down mix presets, so we could listen to this particular project. And if I wanted to just listen in mono, and in stereo, that was okay. Guess all along I was so naive. So you get kind of an idea what it sounds like sonically. Our musical history laid out on the floor. I've got to choose what's mine and what's yours. And I have a lot of friends, that are pretty heavy duty mixers that will tend to mix everything and stay in mono until like the last 5% of their mix, just to make sure that everything is working in mono. And they're like, if it works great in mono and it sounds great in mono, it'll sound better in stereo when, adding some different elements. So, but that's a really easy way, kind of using the down mix presets in Cubase to just kind of switch back and forth between stereo, mono, whenever you need it. Okay, thanks for all the, you see a lot of great discussion. Okay, hi Greg, question. Hi Greg, what is the best way to copy an audio event from one position to another to make the event stay in time when the tempo varies? Okay. So I'll just do this with a quick drum loop. Show the principle of it. Okay, so let's say I have drum loop starting here. And I'll copy that drum loop, just hold down my Alt or Option key. Here, let's add a tempo track. So, you know, if you have audio that's set into musical mode, we can, you know, we could select it and we could choose for it to be in musical mode or not in musical mode. So if I have this track here, and what I want to do now is we could set, so even if it's the same beat, let me see if I could change. Okay. So, you know, at this point, if we just take it out of musical mode, it's going to play back the same speed regardless of tempo. So if I come here, my tempo map's enabled and the tempo slowed down, or its tempo is sped up. So at this point, so it's, even though it kind of looks like it's longer, it's playing back the same speed. It's just the tempo time has changed. But if these were both in musical mode, they would automatically start to speed up and follow the tempo changes. So let's say now that this will be faster. So that will, and if you have like the same audio event and you wanted to, you know, one to follow the tempos and one not to, that would, the musical mode would be on a file by file basis. So if you wanted to have one react independently and differently than the others, you'd probably have to just go to bounce, select it, go to bounce selection, and replace the event. And then this one could be in musical mode and this one could not be, even though it's kind of the same file, but it's a different physical audio file of it. Okay, question from John Costigan. Because I can work in 64-bit float in Cubase, does this make it difficult for others to listen to the recording files? So, you know, if you have, it really depends on what files you're sending. So when we have the 64-bit floating point, and we could determine that, we go to the studio setup, and let's select our VST audio system. We have the choice of 32-bit float or 64-bit float precision. So at that point, you know, it really, that's the internal math that's going on for resolution. When we go to our project setup, you know, here, if we choose to have a 64-bit float file and you send it to another DAW, it could be very likely that the other DAW won't read that 64-bit float file. So because its audio engine isn't capable of doing it. So, but if you're just doing it for the internal processing and you give them a 32-bit or 24-bit file, it won't be any problem. If you're actually passing on or rendering So let's say if I come here and I do an export audio mixdown, and we choose to render as, you know, a 64-bit floating point audio file for others to listen to, they may have difficulty doing it if the audio engine doesn't support that. Okay, question. Is it possible to apply insert effect only to fragment of audio file spliced example on one track? So let's say I have my drum loops enabled here. So it's like, and I just want to take one little hit. Let's say that little snare hit right there in the middle. So this one here. So what I could do is I'm going to select that. And I want to I could go to hit F7 or go to your direct offline processing. And I could say, I just wanted to put a plug-in. So let's say just a delay just on that particular file. So as we listen to it, or it's probably just too short to trigger. So let's say I just want to take just a portion here and I wanted to put a flanger. So I will just come over here, let's say to my modulation effects, and let's flange just that particular section, and let's make it a really fast flanger. So now as I come here, we play. So all you have to do is kind of just select the range here and say, okay, now I just want to put reverb just on that particular section. And as we listen to it, and if it is an insert effect, you know, what you could do is, so let's say if I come here and I want it to just run, let's say just a delay on a section. So I could take the beginning here, hit F7. So I'll just take my selection. Let's go to my audio to direct offline processing. And I could just drag the insert effect directly to the selection as well. So now, and then the beauty of the offline processing is that you could go even 10 years later and just say, oh, I didn't like the reverb, but I wanted everything else intact. I could just delete that one offline process completely independently of others. So the original files will always be stored. So just something to consider. All right. So that's how you could just put it on just one little part of a particular file. Okay, question. Is it possible to make an audio recording that doesn't record on the same lane as another event? I know it can clean up lanes. All right, so let's just see if I understand this. Okay, so all right, so is it possible to make an audio recording that doesn't record on the same lane as another event? Okay, so if you have an audio recording, let me just make sure I'm understanding this. And I will just open up lanes. And I'll just put this into a quick loop and I'll hit record. So we can see that every time it does a record pass, and we just make this okay, so I'll just add an audio track. We'll open up its lane view. And now every time that we record, all right, it's going to now just put that into a new lane every single time. So, and again, the question was, is it possible to make an audio recording that doesn't record on the same lane as another event? So every time you record, each recording is going on to a separate lane. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, but let me know. Okay, question. Hi, how can I limit keyboard range for different instrument track? Okay, so if you wanted to do it for, like some instruments will have it built in. So, like for instance, if we add an instrument track for like Hallian or Hallian Sonic, so say I do a Hallian Sonic SE, one of the cool things is if you go to the MIDI tab, you could set your range here. So you can say, okay, I want this pitch to start and to only play in this particular octave range. You could do that. If your instrument isn't quite that smart and you wanted to filter out only particular notes or a particular note range, you could also probably use the input transformer. So let's say, okay, I want this to filter, and we'll say type is equal to MIDI notes, and we'll say value 1, which is the pitch, is inside range, let's say C1 to C3. So, or we could say outside range. So at this point, we could say this will filter every single note that's not within C1 through C3. And then, one thing with the input transformer is to make sure that you activate the module. So again, if we only wanted to see notes within C1 to C3, and we wanted all the other notes to be filtered out, under function in the input transformer, which we could access right here, choose filter, and we're going to say type is equal to notes, pitch, and we're going to say is outside of the range of C1 to C3. And at that point, it will filter out every single note that's not in that particular range. All right, so just kind of... Okay, question. Can you explain constrain delay compensation? All right, so let's go ahead and open up a quick instrument track. I will pop over here. So let's say we have, let's see, my MIDI keyboard is still not cooperating today. So I will open up my virtual keyboard. Okay, so a lot of times when we play, move it up an octave or two. So we can see that when I play and hit the keys that it's pretty responsive latency-wise. Now, if we have certain plugins in our project, like in our master bus, and let's say like some of the plugins that can deal with a lot of latency, And a multi-band compressor is often guilty of this, but we have a live mode, but I'll just use this for demonstration. So now when I hit the keys, you can see that it's going to be, I'll put one more in just for demonstration purposes. Okay, so now these plugins impose latency. So I hit the key. You see it visually to what you hear. So if I just wanted to hit the note again, you can see visually when the note is hit or struck and when the note sounds. So what constrained delay compensation, if you are playing real-time MIDI performance and you had that delay, it would be kind of really hard to play in time. So what the constrained delay compensation can do, and it's this button in the bottom left-hand corner of the transport, once activated, it could basically bypass all the plugins at a certain threshold that cause the latency. So now we can have those plugins bypassed automatically when we're recording, and then when we're mixing, we could just turn that off and on so that we don't have to constantly go through and deactivate like 50 plugins in our project. So I'm done recording. Now I could have the sound of everything, but consider it almost like a tax of your latency. So the constrained delay compensation will bypass plugins when it's enabled to make real-time performance for virtual instruments or tracking with minimal latency easier to do. So just allowing you to bypass latency-heavy plugins. Okay, question. Hi, is there a way to layer 2 or more VST instruments, add a few effects, and save it for easy recalling in another project, sort of like saving a preset? So let's say if I have this Rhodes patch here, so I come and let me just add a couple other instruments. So let's say, okay, I'll throw in a pad shop. All right, so I have these two layered, and let me there's my melody for Gareth. All right, let me add one more instrument. So I will add maybe just a little bit of retro log in there. Okay, so now as I play, and let's say I have these going to like an effects channel. All right, so let's say I'll just add an effects channel to these channels here. So let's say I want to put we'll just add a little revelation to the 2. So now, or to the 3 instruments. So now if I wanted to just come here and be able to play, let's see if my Mac's gonna wake up. Give it a minute here. And then what we could do is we could actually we could export these selected tracks, and we could also just take those selected tracks and import a track archive. So I may try force quit here so we don't have to wait a long time. Some of this stuff was taking longer earlier. And try a quick force quit. Okay. Let me see if I get it going again here. May have to restart my machine. Let's just see what it's going to do. Okay, I'm going to restart my computer really quick. If you could bear with me, maybe just a minute or two for it to reboot. So just hang on just 1 second. I'm going to reboot and we'll come back. All right, I think we'll be back here in just a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's talk about, again, layering two different sounds. So we'll add 2 retrologs just to save time. And let's add an effects channel. And I'm just going to check to make sure the audio is coming through okay. Okay, so audio seems okay. And then what you could do at this point is I will go to my sends. And I will send both retrologs to the reverence. And now if I wanted to, I could just come right here and go to File to Export selected tracks. And we could save these as a music as an XML file. So we'll call it November 3rd, 2020. And now when I go to a particular track, we could do a new project. We'll do empty. And I will go to import track archive. And so we'll see November 3rd, 2020. I could now select all of the events and come right over here. And everything will be preserved with the EQs, the effect settings, and the presets loaded up. Okay, just reading through some more comments. All right. Okay, reading through comments here. Okay. Okay, so I see from Tony La Mancha. Hope I pronounced your name right. Thanks for answering questions about assigning audio to a MIDI drum track from Elisa's DM10. First time in Hang. I'll check out the solutions you suggested. Okay, well, it's great. I'm glad you're on your first Hangout, and we hope to see you again. So just saying comment, retrospect recording Cubase exists since version 7, like 8 years ago. I think it's actually earlier. So I think you could even do some retrospective recording back like VST3. So it could be 20, 25 years, at least 20, 25 years ago. Okay, so I see a question. Hi, Greg. How to colorize the tempo track? So let's add a tempo track. And then we could just see the little dropout menu here. And then you could colorize. So from the inspector, if you want red, yellow, green, you could colorize it just like that. Okay. See, Michael Teams wants people to keep hitting the like button. All right. All right. Reading through comments. So lots of great discussion. I'm learning about cheese as well from Gareth and Pablo. Okay, my chat field just jumped on me. Let me scroll back. Okay, so I may have lost a couple questions. Sorry about that. So I see a question from Gareth. Can Cubase turn water into wine? I think version 11. That's the one feature I could leak. So, but don't tell anyone. Okay, going through. See some coffee discussions. All right, lots of cheese and coffee discussions. All right. All right, see a nice comment from Terry Marsden. I'm a Cubase user for 30 years now and beta tester. Still love popping into here. Always find new ways to do things in Cubase. That's great. Good to see you, Terry. Thanks for joining us. Okay, lots of great discussion. So what about drag and drop audio between different DAW? I tried to drag audio from Cubase to Ableton and vice versa. Sometimes works, sometimes the audio doesn't appear in the track. So I don't have a license of Ableton, so I'm probably not the best person to ask. Maybe someone else could mention, or if someone has both, if they could chime in, that'd be great. Okay. Okay, so question. I will send my songs to Soloist and he gets paid by length of solo. Is there a way to simply see how many seconds there is in a range selection? Any way to measure the amount in time? So let's come over here. So I think we could do it within the, if we just look in the info line. That's a good way to get paid by second, huh? All right, so if I have just a selection range, we can see the range length, and depending upon if you're set in seconds. So if you wanted to come here, let me just select that range so you can see that that is 1 minute, 14 seconds. If you have a part that you know is a solo, you could just select that part. And you could also see length here. So that part there would be 38 seconds. This part would be 1 minute 51, or you can see the length here, 1 minute 51 seconds, 0.137. So you could just kind of see it, and from the info line, and if you don't have the info line here, you could make sure that it's active, and then as you select different parts, you could see the length, or just if you want to use the range tool. Okay, I only have a budget for 27.784 seconds for a solo or whatever. So whatever is selected, you could see kind of the length from the info line, whether it's a range or just an event. So you can see it indicated there in length. Okay, so hi Greg, is there a way to select multiple parameters in the automation parameter drop-down menu? So if we go to our automation lane here, so if you wanted to, see all of the different automations, so let's say if I come here, we had volume, and let's say if I had panning automation, and let's say my EQ. So let's say like if I go to my channel strip, and I go to EQ1, let's say I just wanted to adjust the gain. So I don't know of a way to, immediately see, to immediately select multiple events, but you could come over here and if you go to the automation panel, which is F6, my function key isn't working. So let me just see if I can. So we'll go to the automation panel here, but you can, show used, and that will automatically, just allow you to see all of the automation. But I don't know a way to say, these 9 things of automation, how to select multiple ones at the same time. All right, so hi Greg, is there a way to view all the edits you do with Variaudio and warping and undoing specific edits without just using Control Z? So if you've done a lot of, Variaudio tasks in editing, I'll come over here. Let's just double click and let's say we've done Variaudio editing on our bass part here. So let's say if I just come here and I've now, let me just, so say if I now adjusted the pitch, I moved notes around. So if you go, you can undo kind of all these changes by, going to, as you mentioned, the Control Z, and that will allow you to do that, and Control Shift plus Z. And I think if you go to the edit history, you could see kind of all of the different Variaudio edits kind of listed here, but it's going to be in a linear fashion for the editing for Variaudio. So, but that's another way of viewing it. So if you just want to come here, split, and go right back, you could open up your edit history. All right, so I see Greg, can you show us how to use voicing and single voicing under the chord track session? Some reason I don't think I fully get it, possibly because I don't sing, laughing out loud. All right, so I'll just jump back to, okay, so, when let's say I'll just generate a chord track quickly. And I go into, let's say, the Variaudio editor. Okay, so when we kind of go to, let's say for the event itself, so if we see chords, we could choose to, let me just, all right, so when we go into voicings, at this, we could choose, and often this may be for dealing with, some of the different chords and not so much with like, Variaudio. So when you get into like these voicings, let me just undo that. And let's say I'll just have the voicings play kind of the piano. And I'll just check to make sure that I may have to just set my connections one more time. So, when we see our chord track voicings, once we kind of get into this, we could choose, whether the voicings are like basic triads or if we want it to be piano or for like, guitar voicings. And this will allow us to, because a piano player playing block chords, will often do different voicings. And that's really, kind of the essence of it. So, as how a guitar player plays a chord versus a piano, they may play the same chord tones, but, the nature of the instruments may, lends itself to different voicings. So, and then you could also get into more, descriptive voicing. So if you want it to be more contemporary jazz or 3-string triads like basic block chords, or if you want triads and 4-note chords, so if you want to add sevenths and stuff like that, you could have these different tensions. So okay, see Agent K had to take off. We'll see you on the next one. Okay, if I import a drum loop into a sampler track and create hit points where the different drum hits, can I bind those hit points to different keys on my MIDI keyboard so I could play different hits? Currently, the sampler track doesn't offer that, but you could do it within a instance of Groove Agent. So let's say. So let's say if I had just an instance of Groove Agent SE, so I'll just come here, and now we could take any drum loop directly onto a pad, like so. And as we do this, we can click on slice and create slices. And now each of the slices can be kind of mapped to different pads. Probably not the best drum loop to show that, but let's come over here to Media Bay. I'll just try. So if I drag this to a pad, and then I could create slices, and now each of the different slices can be triggered from individual notes as you do that, but not currently in the sampler track. Okay, reading through. I guess one of my improvisations sounded like These Dreams by Heart, so I think it's a great song. Okay, just kind of reading through. Okay, reading through different comments. right? So lots of discussion on different computers. So discussion of Ryzen versus Intel and Mac versus PC. All right. See, great comment from Gareth. If you want to know when Cubase 11 is coming out, hit the like. That's always a great thing to do. Okay, so we have a question. Where is the threshold for constrained delay compensation set? So if we go to preferences, let me see if it's under. All right, let's see if I can find this preference really quickly. Okay, so here under VST, you'll see delay compensation threshold for recording. So that's the constrained delay compensation preference that you could set. Okay, my chat field jumped on me. Bear with me. I see a comment from Pablo. Greg is rumored to be the creator of Cubase. I haven't created anything in Cubase, so there's a lot of really smart people in Germany, really smart ladies and gentlemen that work on it in Hamburg. So I just get to communicate what they've created, so they make my job easier. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. A quick question. Now, how do you turn on more shades of colors in a color menu? So if you hit, I think it's Alter Option plus Shift plus S, you could go to the project color setup. So here I see 16 colors. But if you come over to presets, you can now say, okay, I want to see 32 colors. And I want to see 4 color tints. Sorry, you may hear my son who just dumped a bunch of Legos I'm going to have to pick up later on the floor. And now if I hit apply, when I go to add colors, we could have a broad palette of colors to choose from. Okay, so we have Mario checking in from Germany. To see comment, Greg is the type of guy to run antivirus malware bytes on a Mac, so we have to do it for our IT department. So, but I have had issues on my Mac. All right. Okay, so we see from Ace, hi Greg, can you please show how to access chord suggestion panel? Okay, so if we have a chord track, so let's say I have this chord here and I want to, so it helps if you have like a chord before or after, but then, so let's say I have a G with the B in the bass, and then going to E minor, D. So at this point, I could just double click and go to the chord assistant. And then you could have different levels of complexity. You could do it by cadence or common notes, but you could also choose by proximity or circle of fifths. So at this point, you could just kind of get kind of an interesting perspective there. So as soon as you double click on the chord, instead of clicking on editor, click on chord assistant, and then you could have it in list, proximity, or circle of fifths. So I just see any leaks on Black Friday specials. Not that I know of, but I'm sure that Steinberg will have some great stuff. Question, can I make harmonies of a MIDI track only, no audio using chord track to find the notes? So there's not necessarily kind of a harmony function to, like kind of for the vocals, but, you can use some different functions for, like there's a really handy MIDI plugin called Chorder that can actually kind of trigger different chords. So, but you could have some, you could play around with some of the different, if you wanted to trigger different scales. At this point, you could say, I just really wanted to, try out different chords. You could do that from, try out like the MIDI Chorder plugin. Question, can CI2 be used as an audio interface for iPad and Cubase? So I don't think that that was kind of, that interface came out kind of, before iPads. So that wasn't iOS compatible because it wasn't a class compliant device. So I don't believe that you can. So I'm not. There may be some workaround, but I mean, I don't think that there are. Is kind of made pre that and kind of the UR22 came out shortly after the iPad. So. Okay, so hi Greg, I've mixed a song and I want to use this session as sort of a template for the next mixes for an album and import audio. What's the best way to do it? A lot of times what I do with, projects is, let's say I'm in this project and I really liked how this was set up with all of the drums. Like I have a bass line for everything set up. So I like the routing, the buses, everything. At this point, what I would do is I would say import tracks from project. And so I would select this particular project here. And at this point, I would choose not to have events. And, if you see this, we could actually just say, this will be going. So I could, take like my whole tracks. And at this point, we could choose to, map it to similar name projects. But, you could start off and just have, everything set up here, open it up, import all of those settings, and then you can map it to new tracks or to different destinations if you want. And that way you could have kind of all the settings without the audio files, or with the audio files, or without automation, with automation. So check out the import tracks from project feature. Okay, so we had a question. Hi, Greg. I would love to see you do a step-by-step on how to edit, cut audio using regions in audio editing window. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's say I have this file, and so if we go to the little setup window here, we could activate the regions window. At this point, I could say, oh, I like this. I wanted to add that as a region. And what this is not the actual audio file, but these are just like little sections of the audio file. So I say, oh, I really like these two notes or this phrase, and you could double click and give it a name, especially if you're dialogue editing for like interviews or films, or a podcast. You can say, oh, so-and-so really, they said, this is like the key line here. You could do all this, find your different regions, add them. Now, if we want to see the regions and be able to drag these regions into our project, we could go to our pool under the media window. And when we see a little plus sign, that indicates that these files are regions. So instead of dragging the entire file out, I could just drag a region out directly to the timeline. So open up the pool. Now, so these are just like a subsection of the audio file with a different start and end position. But if I wanted to turn these into distinct audio files that are new files, at this point I could select the regions from the pool, right click, and we'll go to processes, or go to audio rather, and just choose bounce selection. It'll ask us where we want to save the files to. And now all of these will be just raw audio files that have been bounced out for us. So that's some ways to kind of work with regions. So doing like dialogue editing, books on tape, stuff like that. Cubase works, that's a great feature for that. Okay, I know we had some questions that were sent in, so let's get to those. We still have time. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you've done that. And also make sure you hit the like button. Okay, so we had a question. In quick controlled knobs for let me open up a project that we made for this. Okay, so the question again, in the quick control knobs for multi-temporal instruments with added MIDI tracks like Kali and Sonic, etc., automatically update when you switch switch MIDI tracks. Is that possible with third-party instruments like Contact? When I tried different MIDI tracks, it don't change controls. So like when I go to my quick controls here, as we switch to different instruments, the quick controls are kind of updated. And I think this might be part of the VST3 specification. So I haven't tried it with I don't have any third-party plugins on my computer here, but, Contact is still, after 13 years now, is still a VST2 instrument. So I think that could be the limitation that you run into there. Question: is there a Cubase EQ tool that can help find automatically bad resonances? Maybe in Cubase 11, the EQ will do a lot of great things, but it's going to show you kind of the frequencies which are in the project. So if I look at my project here, and I open up the EQ, I could see, the different frequencies that are there. Now, if that's clashing with something else, and that's a bad resonance, the resonance could be in your room and not in the EQ. So it's really, it could be very subjective to find to determine what a bad resonance is, because, an EQ shouldn't have any bad resonances, or your file shouldn't have any bad resonances, but your room may, and different instruments clashing against each other may. So, and if you had, another track that you were worried about it clashing with, you could actually select it here and then just kind of toggle back and forth, and you could see both EQs kind of overlaid on top of each other, and you could switch back and forth to minimize any kind of, sonic clashing with the EQ. All right, question. Can I load a MIDI file directly in instrument tracks and not in MIDI tracks? Or can all MIDI tracks from a MIDI file be transformed automatically in instrument tracks? So if we go to your preferences in Cubase and go to MIDI file, you have a couple of different options. So on import, by default, it will do Halligan Sonic SE multi-timbral, but you could also have it do MIDI tracks or instrument tracks directly there. Okay, so question. I got an issue with tempo tracks. I've seen a few people having the same issue in Steinberg's forum. Basically, every time I import a tempo track, it changes the duration of the project, and tempo track is stretched. At least it looks like it. I thought I did something wrong in my templates, so I tried with an empty project, created a basic tempo track with a few points, exported it, and then when I import the track as SMT in the same project or even new one, it changes the duration of the project. So like 5-minute project to a 1 or 2 hour project. See photo. I don't know what to do. Maybe you got some ideas. Thanks a lot. And this is from Neil. If you want to send me a project to look at, I'd be happy to kind of look at the particular project. But and Neil wasn't kind enough to send 2 photos along with it. And I noticed that in the second photo that the time scale had jumped from bars and beats to samples, it looked like. So make sure that so that could account for the visual representation, so the visual discrepancy, because the time scales are different. But if you wanted to email me a project or email me your tempo track, I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it. Maybe just a project file and a tempo track, and then I should be able to kind of get a better look at it. Okay, so hi Greg, is there any way to create strumming effect in the key editor? So there's a number of different strumming tools that people will often utilize. So let's say if I add an instrument track, so that I'll just go to an existing MIDI track here. And let's say if I have just a bunch of notes kind of in here, and I want it, let's say they're all starting at the same point. If you grab your tool here, like this tool here, kind of the trim tool. So if you hold down kind of like Alt, let me just make this larger. We could just kind of, let me select the correct tool. So I'm going to select the trim tool. And I think if you hold down like Alt, you could do kind of strumming. You could do different rhythmic patterns like that. So if you say, okay, I wanted to trim the end or kind of, the beginning of that, or hold down the Alt key. So, people will do kind of different strumming effects using kind of the, we select the trim tool. So do some experimentation with that. And there's all sorts of different arpeggiators you could do kind of outside of the key editor. So question, hi Greg, thanks again for all your help with these questions. Is there a way to jump to the cursor playhead using a quick key? I want to enter timecode using Shift P and then jump to it on the arrange window and then paste an item and then past an item. So I'm not sure if it's past or paste, but let's say if I just wanted to hit Shift P, that would take me, and I could say, let's go to 01, 01, 01, and that would take you directly to that particular. So let's say if I hit Shift P and I'll say 06, 06, 06, that will take you to that position. Let me just try with a new project here without an offset. All right, let's see if I have. Okay, so now if I wanted to hit Shift P, and then let's say I wanted to go to 2 minutes, 4, yeah, so let's say. So now when I hit enter, that takes you to, I think that should take, let me just try, I thought, so let's say I hit 04. So I thought when we hit this from there, that it would take you to that moment in time. Let me just. So when I just, let's say if I hit Shift P and I go to. Looks like I got it to do it once or twice. So let's say I go to 14. And let's say hit Shift P. Let's go to 23. So it looks like it seems like it's working sometimes and not others, but let me just try again. I'm probably just having a brain cramp. So let's say I go to 7 seconds. All right, so I'm going to go to 12 seconds. So it looks like when I hit Shift P and then just navigates, let's say I go to 54 seconds and 11 frames, that it just kind of navigates there, and then you could paste or go past that. So give that a shot, but it seemed to kind of, once I have this and you just kind of put the, so as I go 00, 33 seconds, and 44 frames, hit enter, that it just takes you there. Okay. So next question, when I have a one-shot sample selected on a pad in Groove Agent, Beat Agent, which is being triggered by a MIDI pad currently playing in my song, how can I cycle through other one-shots in the same folder on my hard drive or that pad to hear other potential options, let's say kick drum in context of my MIDI part and song arrangement? Okay, so let's say if I have just a quick pattern going on in Groove Agent. Okay, so let's say I have and I wanted to audition through different kick drums. So what I could do is I'm going to just select this pad here. And we click on this little folder icon. And then we could choose instruments. And we could choose, okay, let's find our kick drums. And, you know, we could also just look on your browser anywhere in your, you know, on your computer. But I'll just say, okay, let's do instruments, kick drums. And now I could just double click. So while it's playing, we could just audition. Just like that. So that's some easy ways of being able to audition kind of while it's playing back in context. Okay. Hi, Greg. This process is puzzling me for the past few months. If you could help, I'd greatly appreciate it. Let's assume you have 200 drum loops all recorded at varying tempos. I would like to straighten out all the tempo and get them to the loop browser. I have the loop named with the cycle marker and can export with all their names, IDs. You want to fix all the tempos to say 120 BPM. I want to print the new tempo to the files. What's the best way to do that? So let's say I have just a number of different files recorded in my project here. I will go to my pool window. So you can hit Command or Control P. So let's say these are all of my 200 files or whatever. And then we see our tempo here. So if I wanted to write new tempo information, I could just say these are all 144 and the new tempo will be changed and embedded as the metadata directly into the files. So give that a try. And I think that you could probably also do this with in Media Bay. So if I wanted to go to Media Bay, let's go to this computer. I'll go to my documents, to projects, and let's go to Hangouts, and we'll say, I think November 3rd. Let's go to audio. So here's all of the files, and at this point, we could see tempo information. So if I wanted to just enter in 144 as the tempo, you could do it directly there as well. So give that a shot, and I think those are two easy ways to do that. All right, my second question now is that how would the workflow change if loops have varying time signatures, 4434, 5468? Should I split them into different projects? You don't necessarily have to split them into different projects, but you know, going into your pool window again, or into Media Bay, because you could do it in either location. So if you go to your pool, you could see the signature. And then if you wanted to go directly to Media Bay, you could see the signature here. So you could change the signature and embed that as the metadata for the files. Okay, this is quite a big one. Feel free to skip if it's too deep for a hangout. Okay, check time. Okay, could you quickly give a walkthrough of post-production template of Cubase Nuendo demonstrating VCAs, groups, effects channels, stems, and print tracks, please? Some of the routing is a little different. So if we have, see if we could do this expeditiously here. Okay, I'll activate this. Okay, so we have groups and effects channels. Okay, so groups can pass audio. So if you're doing kind of a print through track, so if I wanted to take all of these tracks and assign them to a group, I could right click and then we could go to group channel to selected channels. Once we've done this group can now sum all of these different channels. So the audio of this can be routed here, and then we could apply processing such as dynamics and EQs and change the sound of that. If we have a lot of existing automation and if I bring this down, the problem is that bringing this down can alter other gain structures of like these tracks if they have send effects to like a reverb. So if I have existing automation, what I could do is take these tracks, excuse me, and add a VCA track to the selected channel. So now if they're being automated, this could move, this will actually move the fader position. So if the automation is going up while I move the VCA down, the automation still goes up but is decreased as I'm moving in a contrary motion. The VCA does not sum. If I wanted to send all of these to an effect, we can now add an effects channel to the selected tracks. So all of those tracks can now be sent directly to my reverb unit. Now, if you're doing print through, you may just, take, dialogue, sound effects, Foley, music through different groups. So you could have those groups and then have the ability to have, more tracks that when I add an audio track after. So if I'm here after this, I'm going to say, let's add a track. So we could just kind of come over here. I'll just do it right from here. So let's add an audio track. So now this audio track, if I wanted to do print through, this is when groups make sense because that audio track that group could be an input for further tracks. So a lot of people may take, 5.1, feed everything into a 5.1 group for different categories, sound effects, music, dialogue, etc. So those different stems are fed to groups, and those groups can be fed to other audio tracks for print through. So that's kind of a quick delineation. So I hope that makes sense. But if it's not helpful, just let me know and we can go in more detail. Okay, we have a question on automation. If I've written some unwanted automation on multiple points and want to delete a certain range in the middle, is there a way to delete a couple of points without the automation curve blocking out into right angles so that it would interpolate between the remaining points? So let's take a quick look. I think so let's say if I'm here and I had just a lot of automation points. So let's say if I was, Okay, so let's say if I just have some different automation points. So if I wanted to just get rid of these 2 points, I could select them and hit delete. And we see that that doesn't kind of create kind of like a block, any right angles. So as I do that, just kind of select them and delete. And as we do that, that kind of interprets, between those 2 points. And the second question also, is there any way to click on a single automation point and remove it? So if I wanted to just select, if I go from underneath, we could just select the automation point and just hit delete. And you can see even there that it did, the interpretation between the two. So where we had kind of that line to jump down, select it, hit backspace or delete, and that would be taken care of for you. All right, let's go back to our live feed here. Thanks for all the great questions. We're going to check our time. Okay, we have just a couple minutes. All right, so question from Jay. Out of curiosity, do discount offers have a time frame window? I ask as sometimes there's no social media excitement like the ones offered now, yet they're offered for longer than a month. Asking because some still need other discounts like Absolute and Spectral Layers, which will lead me and likely others to compound purchases related tools like Backbone and Absolute expansion. We have, Steinberg probably has the broadest range of a portfolio for, music and audio production. So, we try to get, different promotions going on, so, at different months, there may be, Cubase promotion we've done, there may be, so they're kind of timed out, but, if you figure we do all the virtual instruments, we do Spectral Layers, we do Nuendo, Wavelab, Cubase, Dorico, so it's a pretty broad portfolio. So that's why sometimes, you'll see them kind of the promotions for like a month because there's going to be another promotion coming soon. And, promote, so a Dorico promotion, could be, really significant for someone and, and the other person's waiting for the Cubase or Spectral Layers promotion. So. Apparently the chord track is my Achilles heel, but I got an A in music theory, so. I see some interesting speculation, not currently in the sampler track about slicing, so it's just currently not in there. So. All right, we're going to wrap up here in just a minute. Let's see if there's one last quick question before we run out of time. Before we run out of time on our free. Okay, before we lose our free time. All right, so I see. Hi, Greg. In the chord track, is it possible to do different inversions of the chord like you can in the chord pads? So if we have a chord track, and we'll end on this. You could choose to do different chord track voicings. So let's. So once you're here on the chord track, you could just kind of select. Just make this So I'll just go to the editor. So let's say I want this to be a D major chord, and then you can see voicings here. And here you could do first and second inversions. All right, with that, we're just about ready to run out of time. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. We should be having the Hangout this upcoming Friday, so we hope to see you there. We hope that everyone stays safe and healthy. And please send questions in advance, and thank you for all the wonderful questions. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do that and hit the like button, and we'll see you on Friday. Please have a great time. Take care.